Right by Them, a Magnus Archives fanfiction written by Esperosis and read by Ibis Podfic. Chapter 21, Reconciliation and Realization. Summary. John and Tim have a talk, and Tim lets John in on a concern he and the others have been having. It had been 3 days since John and Tim's row, and John wanted nothing more than to talk to Tim already. Magnus and Sasha told him it would be best to let Tim come to him, and while John didn't know, he was reasonably certain the two of them were discussing something behind his back. The eye, of course, jumped on the opportunity to fill his brain with paranoia and genuinely terrible ideas, to the point John was debating the merits of just knocking himself unconscious until Tim decided to approach him. It was when John was sitting in the break room, trying to ignore this constant stream of thoughts that his friends were plotting to kill him, that Tim finally approached him. "Hey, John," he said, sitting in the seat next to John. "Tim," John breathed, "I'm not upset with you." "Yeah, mine told me right after you got done scolding me. Still, that was," Tim sighed. "You were just trying to make me feel better, and if I was in your shoes and someone took a cheap shot at, let's just say I wouldn't have reacted as calmly as you did. Honestly, I'd be totally fine if you wanted to hit me right now." John ran a hand through his hair. "I don't want to hit you, Tim. I'm all right. I just want things to go back to normal." "Then why were you upset?" Tim asked. "Because, don't lie to me, I saw your face." "I didn't," John muttered. "Didn't what?" "See my face," John clarified. "I felt a lot at that moment. I don't know what I looked like, what I felt." "You looked heartbroken," Tim told him gently. "Ah." John gave an empty laugh. John supposed he was heartbroken, considering how many wishes he had that it returned to nothing but ash in his hands. He wished that what Tim had said was true. From the bottom of what was left of his soul, he wished it was the truth. He wished he had gotten away, and the strings that had bound his life and limbs had broken rather than simply gotten subtler. He wished the web hadn't caused him to do such awful things. He wished all the awful things he'd done could be blamed on the web. He wished he wasn't a curse on anyone who got too close to him. He wished Georgie hadn't been right that he couldn't be saved. He wished that he didn't have to do this all over again. He wished he could have been what they deserved, what any of them deserved. But that wasn't John, it wasn't his fate, and it wasn't his luck. And that hurt. God, did it hurt. But John couldn't tell Tim any of that. So when his best friend asked him why, John said something else entirely, something that used to be true. "Because there are some common trends in the statements. Meat, isolation, spiders. And one thing I noticed was, in quite a few of the spider ones, the statement givers are quite a bit like me. Traumatized young, inevitable arachnophobia, but it isn't until adulthood that the spiders come back in a much more obvious way." "Shit." Tim ran a hand through his own hair, understanding seeming to dawn him. My encounter was with Lightner, so perhaps it's different. But it might not be, and damn, You can still feel free to punch me, John." "I won't," John sighed. Tim considered him sadly. "You really are a lot different when you were in research." John frowned. "Yes, I suppose so. I remember." Tim leaned back in his chair. "Back before Sasha and I knew you were arachnophobic, Linda nearly jumped out of her skin at a tiny little spider on the coffee maker. I took care of it for her, of course. But when I told you and Sasha how dumb I thought it was to be scared of something so tiny, oh, you were fuming for days." John cringed at the memory. "Yes, that was, a bit of an overreaction. Sorry. And this is a bit of an underreaction." John's eyes widened in surprise. "What?" Tim sighed as he leaned back forward once more, toward John as he looked meaningfully into his eyes. "What I mean is that you've changed a lot, John. Sasha and I, and even Martin have noticed, but we're worried you haven't changed entirely for the better." Ice-cold fear flooded John's entire body, and the skin over every inch of his body practically vibrated. His terror must have shown on his face as Tim immediately backtracked. "Okay, that came out wrong. Just let me explain, all right?" Okay." John tilted uncomfortably as the buzzing of his skin died down slightly. "You have a big heart, John," Tim began, "and you care about everything so much. So, to protect that big heart of yours, you put up walls, big, thick brick walls so that nothing can hurt you. When Sasha and I realized that about you, we decided to work together to take those walls down, because we got the feeling that the Jonathan Sims behind those walls was a pretty good guy, and we wanted to be friends with him. And you know what, John? We were right. So, over the years of our friendship, Sasha and I, brick by brick, resolved to take down the walls. And for a while, we were pretty sure we finally succeeded when we got down here, and you seemed so much better." John nodded, not really sure if he liked where this was going. Tim's expression then darkened and his voice dropped lower, more serious. "But there's another way to break down walls, John. Instead of carefully taking them down, you could just take a big old wrecking ball and smash them and whatever's inside, crowding the bricks into sand so they can't ever be rebuilt." John swallowed hard. I just want you to be better. To do better. And you are, in so many ways, John. We're worried about you. I'm worried about you. Some of the things you do are good, but it doesn't seem healthy. I'm sorry, John averted his eyes. Don't apologize, Tim told him. You haven't done anything wrong. John did everything wrong. We just want you to feel better. John could never feel right again. We care about you. John doesn't care about himself at all. We want you to be happy. The only times in John's life when he felt truly happy were 16 days in Scotland, when he realized he had a second chance to save his friends, and when his parents were alive, which he doesn't even remember. If someone hurt you, John, please tell us. We'll ruin their life. Promise, Tim gently encouraged, his eyes searching John's face. John could feel Eliza's gaze boring into him. It's nothing that dramatic, just a, John trailed off. The deep anger settled itself on Tim's face. John knew Tim didn't believe him. Look, Tim, I can't. Maybe someday, but not now. Please leave it alone. Tim was silently fuming, enraged that, once again, he was powerless to stop terrible things from happening to the people he cared for. Tim drew close and held him. I'm going to hold you to that. One day, you're going to tell us who hurt you. John nodded. He should probably come clean about the pseudo-time travel to the others someday. They deserved to know what kind of monster they were calling a friend. But John was terrified of how they'd react, what they'd think and say. He didn't want to lose them again. But that was his own selfishness talking. Not telling them would only benefit him, and he didn't deserve that. He would tell them, just not yet. Not while Elias was still watching. Not while John was still too weak to resist the countless awful things he could do to John and his friends. Not yet. Could you at least tell me why you can't tell me? Tim gently asked. John thought for a moment that he still felt Elias's gaze. He shook his head. Are you afraid they'll hurt you again? Please, Tim, John begged as he pulled back from the embrace. Please, just don't. Tim breathed in, his whole body tense, and then he breathed out. He silently nodded, and his trademark grin was plastered back on his face, but John could tell he wasn't any calmer than before. All right, boss man, I'll stop prying. John hesitated. He knew Tim was trying to bring the mood back up. But there was one more thing John had to say. I should tell you that, while we were talking earlier, knew something about you. John's eyes darted to the side, avoiding Tim's gaze. Tim frowned, then sighed. All right, what was it? John was slightly taken aback by how calm Tim was about this. Last time around, Tim was so enraged by the mere prospect of it happening that he would get angry whenever John asked him a question. Now, however, he only seemed slightly put out. You're not angry? John couldn't stop himself from asking. I mean, I don't like it, Tim grimaced. But if you can't control it, then getting mad is just going to make you not want to tell me when it happens. I suppose so. So? Tim asked. What was it? I knew you were mad because you felt like you couldn't stop terrible things happening to the people you cared about. Tim hummed in consideration. Okay, that's honestly not as bad as I was expecting. Still would rather keep stuff like that to myself, but yeah. I'm sorry, John apologized. Look, if once you get a hang of your superpowers, you promise not to peer into my head, I'll count that apology enough, Tim told him. Deal. Speaking of which, you haven't happened to, know anything about our mystery paper booby trapper or other awful spookies lusting for archivist blood, have you? John laughed. I wish it was that useful. Still, at least the only major downside is a bit of friendly Snoopy. Sasha does that as a hobby. Tim, who could very easily kill John in 17 different ways right this very second, laughed. Then he frowned. Unless it's giving you migraines or something. John forced a laugh. No, no migraines, no. Tim stared blankly at him. What? John frowned. It's just the way you said that. The way what do you mean? Kinda made it sound like there's something. No, I said that perfectly normally, John insisted. You said, Tim began a spot-on John impression. No, no migraines, no. Yes, because I'm not having migraines. Then you would have just said, nah, Tim, my bestest buddy in the whole world, I'm feeling just peachy. I am, John scowled. I am feeling just peachy. Tim didn't look convinced. What is it? Nothing, John insisted again. Johnson Sims, you are hands down the shittiest liar I've ever met. John took offense at that. I am not. Tim sat back and crossed his arms. All right, tell me there are no hidden drawbacks that you haven't told us about. There are no hidden drawbacks that I haven't told you all about. Liar. John sparred indignantly. You just decided not to believe me. Yeah, 'cause you're a shit liar, Tim smirked. John threw his hands up. How am I supposed to win an argument like that? You're not, Tim's smirk widened. You're supposed to tell your good old pal Tim what the problem is. John groaned as Tim looked on, very pleased with himself. Fine. I've been feeling a bit paranoid. Paranoid? Yes, but I know the feelings aren't mine. They aren't from me or what I think or feel, so I've been ignoring them, John quickly added. Okay, but are you sure it's like paranoia, or is it you knowing stuff to try and keep you safe? Like it's not paranoia if they really are out to get you. John grimaced. Well, unless you're secretly planning on grabbing me by the hair and slamming my head into the table until I die. No, I'd say definitely paranoia. Tim looked disturbed. Yes. And that happens often? Tim asked. It's increasing in frequency, John admitted. The eye was likely starting to get impatient at the irritants that the knot then was skulking about its temple. Is there anything we can do to help? I know it's not me, it's not what I think, feel, or believe. So besides not secretly plotting my murder, no, I've got it handled, John gave him a reassuring smile. Damn, Tim sighed in overdramatic disappointment. There go my weekend plans. Guess I'll have to fall back to plotting to assassinate Elias instead, John chuckled. I'm thinking, Tim continued, proper water bucket above the door to his office and watch him dissolve as the Wicked Witch in The Wizard of Oz. John grinned. Wouldn't he be a warlock, since he's a man? Tim tutted. Men can be witches too in this day and age, boss. I had no idea Elias was so progressive. No, you're right, Tim agreed. I'm honestly surprised he hasn't faded from seeing women wearing trousers yet. Implying he notices women at all, John smirked. Tim Barton laughed at that before he began chuckling. John quickly joining him, the laughter making it serious to ignore Elias's near ever-present gaze. Tim finally got his laughter under control, his grin much lighter than it was before. All right, I think that's our cue to head back out and rejoin Sasha and Martin. Wouldn't want the boss to catch us slacking off. Quite right, John nodded stiffly, and tried to sound like himself from 4 years ago. Back to work, Stoker. Tim gave a mock salute. Yes, sir. John felt a bit lighter as he exited the break room with Tim. After work, John found himself on the doorstep of a conversation he had been dreading from the moment he woke up that morning in the hospital after the incident with his hand. But it had to happen. He ordered that much for failing her again. John hesitated for a moment as he knocked on the door, the impact of the wood on his knuckles causing the skin of his hand to buzz. Within a few seconds, he heard footsteps on the other side approaching, a fumbling of locks, and the door finally opened as Georgie appeared with the mewling Admiral in her hands. Ah, Georgie, I hope this isn't a bad time, John started. Great time, actually. She all but threw the Admiral into her arms. Your son is being a pain in the ass and keeps crying the second I put him down. I have 3 more ad reels to record tonight. I'm starving, but this needy little brat won't let me put him down. She lamented as she strode back into her flat toward the kitchen. Hold him for me, would you? Sure, John agreed as he quickly closes the door behind him, the Admiral purring in his arms. Georgie, there's actually something I wanted to speak to you about. All right, what's up? She asked as she tended to the pot and saucer she had on the stove. John hesitated. You could still back out. He wouldn't back out. I was wondering if, after you told us about what happened to you when I was in the hospital, if you've been having strange, dreams? Georgie twisted around to frown at him for a second. I have. Why? John began to tremble, but he refused to cry. I'm so sorry, Georgie. Georgie looked surprised as she stirred the contents of the pot. Why? I'm in those dreams too, Georgie. I can see you. Georgie's face marred from surprise to shock. Wait, that weird eyeball, John, is you. Like, actually physically you. Yes, I'm invading your dreams. John frowned, and a mix of confusion and hurt settled on her face. Why would you do that? I'm not, John panicked, and the Admiral squirmed in his arms. John forced himself to untense. It's not on purpose. It just happens whenever I fall asleep. I can't move, speak, or look away. I'm just trapped, frozen, watching. So, you're not really doing it, Georgie nodded to herself. It's just sort of happening. To both of us. I would never do this on purpose. Please believe me, Georgie, John pleaded. I believe you. John sagged in relief, the Admiral purring against his chest. He turned back to her pot and saucer and hummed. So you can't do anything at all? No, he said. I would if I could. That sounds like it sucks. John sputtered as the Admiral began patting his chin. How I feel isn't the problem. I literally invaded your nightmares, Georgie. She shrugged. I mean, yeah, it sucks I have to revisit one of the worst moments of my life every week, but it doesn't exactly sound like you're having fun either. Still! Look, John, she sighed. It's awful, but sitting around being miserable about it won't solve anything. Let's just focus on fixing it. We'll look up some stuff on lucid dreaming, see if we can learn to control it. John pet the Admiral, which placated the fuzzy cat. What if I can never control it? What if it can't be fixed? Then we'll just have to learn how to deal with it. John nodded. So for now, what I think we should do is you need to tell Tim, Sasha, and Martin about the whole dream invasion thing, and we can start talking tomorrow about what we're going to do about it, alright? John cringed. Actually, would it be possible for you to tell them? I'm really sorry to ask. I need to make some calls tonight, and I'm not sure I'll have the energy afterwards. What kind of calls? Georgie asked. You're not the only person I'm seeing in my dreams, Georgie. Georgie froze at that before slowly turning around, her eyes wide. What? Every person I've taken a life statement from is in my nightmares. John avoided her gaze. I need to explain what's happening to them, and I don't think they're going to take it as well as you have. Oh, Georgie's hand trembled over his wooden spoon. I imagine nightmares are more frightening for them. Yes, John whispered as the Admiral squirmed his arms. Georgie nodded. Damn. I'm so sorry, Georgie. John's eyes burned. If you're sorry, then fix it, she told him, and don't do it for anyone else. We know what happens if you take a life statement now, so don't do it again. John knew he was on borrowed time. The moment he told them all about his time travel, the moment he told them he had known the whole time about the nightmares, they'd hate him. They'd see him for the weak, pathetic coward he was. He trembled as he unclenched his jaw. He didn't want to lose them. He really, really didn't want to lose them. But John was never meant to have nice things. He was meant to suffer like a good little puppet and then die. But for now, however temporarily, he had his friends, and they seemed to care for him, so he'd enjoy it while it lasted, and hopefully it would make the heartache of their absence hurt just a little less when the time came. Do you mind if I borrow the guest room to make the calls? John asked. Might as well stay over, Georgie told him. I've got one of those mattresses from the sponsorship I got. It's in the guest room because those things are not great. Thank you, Georgie. Georgie smiled at him. What are friends for? John carefully put the Admiral down on the couch, much to the cat's chagrin, and he quickly made his way into the guest room and shut the door, the Admiral hot on his heels. It took about 2 seconds for the cat to start scratching at the door and crying. Oh my God, you are such a baby, Georgie huffed, as John could hear her walking over and presumably scooping up the cat as the scratching stopped. John took a few deep breaths and began making the calls he knew he had to make. John wasn't at all surprised to hear that every single one of the statement givers were still awake, likely dreading going to sleep because of him. John also found he was, mostly, correct in that the statement givers did not take the news very well. Then again, there really wasn't a good way of saying, oh no, you're not just inserting me into your nightmares, I'm very real and causing the nightmares. My bad. He only got through the entire explanation of what was happening with Jordan Kennedy and Carolina Gorka. Jordan Kennedy was freaked out and asked if John could just stop. He practically begged him to stop, and it broke John's heart to tell him he didn't know how. Jordan sobbed over the phone as he told John how awful the nightmares were, how badly they were affecting him, and he pleaded with John to please just stop. John held back his own tears and he told him he was trying to figure out how, and that he wouldn't stop until he found a solution. Jordan continued to cry over the phone before eventually hanging up. John had to take a minute to breathe before moving on to the next call. Carolina Gorka took the news surprisingly well. She wasn't exactly happy about it, but she seemed to approach the nightmares with the same bland apathy as she had when she'd nearly been crushed to death by the train. He merely asked if John could stop and accepted when he said he didn't know how, but he was trying his best. John wasn't exactly sure how he felt about her, but he wasn't sure if the suspicion she might be slowly turning into an avatar of the braid was from the eye or just himself. Tessa Winters took it by far the worst. He knew the phone call wasn't going to go well when she immediately became slightly hostile when he explained who he was. He was right, as by the moment she understood what he was saying was happening to both of them, she started screaming down the phone at him. She demanded he let her go, called him a monster, a freak, a horrible disgrace of a human being. She asked him how he could watch her suffer like that, night after night. He tried to explain, but every time he opened his mouth, she just screamed louder as her grants became more hysterical. He tried to bite back his tears, but find them rolling down his face anywhere as he curled in on himself, forcing himself to listen to her righteous fury. He had to hang up after an hour. He still had one more phone call to make. Lastly, he called Dr. Elliot. The man was confused and indignant, but as John described the dream they found themselves both in once a week, Dr. Elliot seemed to quickly come to his senses. He asked John to stop, but John told him he couldn't. He offered John money, resources, anything to stop, but John told him he wanted nothing more than to stop. He just didn't know how. The man pleaded with John. John could only tell him that he was going to do whatever he could to stop the nightmares. John could tell Dr. Elliot was upset when they ended the phone call, but he also knew the doctor realized it was futile to argue more. John laid down on the uncomfortable mattress of Georgie's guest room and stared at the ceiling. He didn't close his eyes for a second that night. His victims deserved their rest far more than he did.